this way. Welcome everyone to the Superior Schoolhouse. Once again, we've got another sold-out lecture here, which we're happy to have. For those of you it's your first time here, we try to do this about once every other month, a lecture about Cleveland Heights history or architecture or general Cleveland history, and I think it's been very well received from people in the community. I see a lot of familiar faces from month to month. We do advertise for these in the Focus on the Heights, in the city's monthly calendar, and also the Historical Society. If you're a member, you get a notice mailed directly to your home. There are membership forms in the back. This is co-sponsored by the Landmark Commission of the City of Cleveland Heights and the Cleveland Heights Historical Society. This building, for those of you who have not been in here, is owned and operated by the City of Cleveland Heights, is a museum and educational center about our history and architecture and preservation of that architecture. Just a couple of little things I'd like to note. The first is that for those of you who may have heard me talk about it, we are in the process of working on an oral history project where we're interviewing people who have lived in the community for a long time about their experiences here in Cleveland Heights, and we're having a fantastic time. I see several of our volunteers in the audience right now, and if you are or know of anyone who would be a wonderful person to tell us wonderful stories about this community, we're happy to hear it. We are learning all about from the teens and the 20s through integration and beyond in the community. And we're going to be having an exhibit the first 2 weeks of December at the Cleveland Heights, University Heights Main Library on Lee Road, where we'll be putting up some of the quotes that we've heard, as well as news clippings and photographs. So the first half of December, if you get a chance, swing by the main library and check it out. And it's just a teaser. We're going to be doing more of that next year for the state's bicentennial in 2003. The second thing, I just wanted to make note of a couple things in the building. The first is that the restrooms are through there if you need them. After the presentation, you're welcome to take a look upstairs. There's a little slideshow of old photographs of Cleveland Heights on the computer. Also after the lecture, Apple Tree Books is selling Marion's book, which she will sign. If we run out, they're, I'm sure, happy to take orders. It's a fantastic book, and I'll tell a little about that in my introduction. Also, you'll see at the exit there's a donation box. We're happy to accept donations that help us continue to present these kind of lectures and build our collection of old photographs and Cleveland Heights memorabilia. So anything you can give us is welcomed. With that, I will introduce Marion Morton. I've known Marion for many years. She was on our Landmark Commission when I first started working at the city, and is a very enthusiastic person. And for years and years, she and I talked about the need for a really good history book on Cleveland Heights. And so I'm happy to report that she has written that book. And I'm also happy to have her here tonight to discuss some of the things she found doing that history. The book, for those of you who haven't seen it, is Cleveland Heights, The Making of an Urban Suburb. One of the things that I love most about it is that it's accurate, as well as full of wonderful historic photographs, which I think everyone that's one of the favorite things of people I've heard commenting on the book. Marion is a professor of history at John Carroll University, and she's lived in Cleveland Heights for 37 years. This book began as walking tours of 3 Cleveland Heights neighborhoods more than a dozen years ago when she served on the city's Landmark Commission. And this is her 7th book. I could go on, but I decided that we'll let her talk about it. And she'll give a presentation, and at the end we welcome questions and take it from there. Marion?
Okay. I think I'm going to turn this slide off. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I have to stand by the mic. Okay. Thanks for coming, everybody. It's nice to be in a room full of history enthusiasts, such as you are. Thank you, Jane Kessler, for coming again and bringing books. And Jane, if I ever write another book, I'm going to make sure you're my agent. Is that okay with you? And thank you also very much to Kara for inviting me here, for lending me photographs which appear in the book, attributed to the planning department. That's really Kara, though. And thank you, Kara, for bugging me all those years to write this book. The book began as an article, and as I did it, Kara kept saying, oh, you know you want to write a book. You know you want to write a book. And I did want to write a book, and I did write a book. So thank you again for that. I have borrowed the title and the narrative of this presentation from the book. Why not? It's mine. And the title of the talk is Controversies and Compromises, the Great Mansions and the Future of Cleveland Heights, 1943 to 1963. And what we see here is Longwood, the great mansion of John L. Severance, coming down in 1961. And I imagine to myself that many Cleveland Heights residents must have imagined to themselves as this came down, what is the world, or at least the world of Cleveland Heights, coming to? I have chosen this picture as my opener because, in general, the fate of Longwood illustrates the central themes of this presentation. The loss of a great mansion that symbolized the exclusiveness and elitism of Cleveland Heights, the replacement of that mansion by an institution, in this case, a giant mall, that in contrast was inclusive and open to all, a bitter, prolonged controversy that pitted neighbors against homeowners, and a compromise by city officials. The raising of Longwood was the culmination, and some might have said the last straw, of 2 decades of heated public discussion about the fate of some of the suburbs' large homes. Their owners wished to sell or reuse the properties. Neighbors, on the other hand, wanted to preserve the homes, symbols of the suburbs' elite beginnings. City officials were caught in the middle. Like residents, they wished to retain the suburbs' residential character and its elitist reputation. Yet city officials were unable or unwilling to tell the homes owners what to do with their own property, nor did they know what to do. These controversies and compromises aroused civic passion because more was involved here than simply these gracious buildings. What seemed to be at stake was the future of Cleveland Heights. What kind of place would it be? Who would live here? With the 2020 vision that hindsight provides, we can see that their worries were well-founded. We can see, in fact, that the diverse, lively, quarrelsome, contentious Cleveland Heights of today begins right here in these years. So let me set the stage a little. The great homes of the Eels, Calhoun, Briggs, and Severance families were built in the first decades of the 20th century as Cleveland Heights became the residence of many of Cleveland's social elite. An exclusive suburb for the elite had in fact been the intention of the best documented of the suburb's early developers. Patrick Calhoun, for instance, had intended to recreate Cleveland's Millionaire's Row in a suburban setting. To achieve this, Calhoun borrowed its name for his own allotment, Euclid Heights, imposed stringent restrictions on the properties, lent money to desirable homeowners, and as an added amenity, built the exclusive Euclid Club for golf enthusiasts. He also built himself 2 imposing homes, one of which we shall see. The first residents of Euclid Heights allotment were very probably the movers and shakers behind the suburbs' withdrawal from East Cleveland Township and its independence in 1901. I forget the slide. And here is the home, still standing home, of one of those movers and shakers, John Hartness Brown. And that is at the intersection of Edge Hill and Overlook. Yes. Other elite neighborhoods, also located on the south side of the city, were developed by the Van Sweringens along Fairmount Boulevard in the north-south streets between Lee Road and Coventry, in Ambler Heights, now called Chestnut Hills, and after the demise of the Euclid Club, the Euclid Golf Allotment developed by B.R. Deming. The last two are now on the National Register of Historic Places, thanks to the efforts of Deanna Bremer, Hugh Johnson, and Janet Coquelette. The preferred architectural styles of the three newer developments were Anglo-American, or what is called by realtors today, colonial. This is a house on a Landon. It is still there. It was built apparently for Alva Bradley. This preference for all things Anglo-American is also expressed in the street names in the suburb's fanciest neighborhoods: Fairmont, Fairfax, Scarborough, Denton, Derbyshire, Harcourt, Coleridge, Corydon, Wellington, Monmouth, and so forth. In contrast, in the northern neighborhoods, streets are more likely to be named after people: Silsby, Taylor, Compton, Minor, Rushley, Noble, for instance, or named after natural phenomenon: oak, whitethorn, sycamore, maple, Yellowstone, ravine, bluestone, and so forth. I don't know why that is. I just thought that was interesting. It's important to remember that most of the residents of Cleveland Heights lived in more modest homes in allotments such as Cedar Heights, Minor Heights, or North Coventry. Many of these homes were duplexes. This is a particularly nice row of duplexes on Belmar. Bungalows were also a popular housing choice, certainly more popular than the great mansions. This is a particularly nice bungalow on Englewood. Yet wherever they lived, many Cleveland Heights residents probably aspired to the social status that these elite developments and their elegant homes on the south side bestowed upon them. These aspirations were certainly encouraged by developers and realtors whose advertisements took full advantage of the suburb's snob appeal. The Potter Estates off Taylor Road, that would be Boynton, Edison, St. Albans, and Radcliffe, were described in 1923 as, quote, directly across from the famous residence of John D. Rockefeller. That is incorrect, or not. The Shaker Heights Development Company, builder of a new home on Inglewood Drive, pointed out that it was located opposite the J.L. Severance estate. That is correct. City officials also encouraged this definition of Cleveland Heights as an exclusive elite suburb. This encouragement took two forms. First, zoning, then a new urban planning tool. City Council established a Planning and Zoning Commission in 1920 and a zoning code in 1921. And here is the map that represents that code, that first version of the zoning code. The goal of the zoning code was to control change, specifically to ensure that Cleveland Heights remained a residential suburb primarily of single-family homes. The code excluded all industry and limited commerce and multiple family housing, that is apartments and duplexes, to where these already existed. And you can tell on the map where these already existed. Obviously, the developers of the zoning code could not do anything about the uses of the property. Public buildings also encouraged the definition of the suburb as both affluent and Anglo-American. A striking example of this was the City Hall built in 1924 and designed by architect William R. Powell. This was an imposing but simple symmetrical two-story brick structure. The only ornamentation was that nice clock tower and the handsome stonework surrounding the front entrance. And as you probably know, that front entrance is now the front entrance to Honda motor cars. The Cleveland Heights Press described the City Hall thus: a colonial structure somewhat reminiscent of Independence Hall in Philadelphia, peculiarly appropriate to Cleveland Heights. I think that's peculiar. Powell also built the Cumberland Pool Bathhouse, and you recognize the same style. A key player in the defining of Cleveland Heights was Mayor Frank C. Kane. His often stated mission in his more than 33 decades in public office was to keep this a community of single-family homes. Kane also sat on the Planning and Zoning Commission, which is very convenient. And also very convenient, we discovered this summer that Powell had designed Kane's home on Compton Road. Cleveland Heights grew very rapidly. Its 1910 population of 2,500 had become more than 50,000 by 1930. During these decades, the suburb developed its school and library systems. And from 1920 to 1928, more than 8,300 housing units were built. This would, of course, include apartments. By 1929, however, home building, the symbol and engine of suburban prosperity, had dropped off sharply. But the Rockefeller family had begun the development of Forest Hill. The 600 homes planned would more than compensate for the suburb's downturn in home building, or so it was hoped. The Rockefeller homes would also maintain the suburb's elite and exclusive character. Deeds to these properties made almost impossible their sale to Jews or African Americans, as many of you know. But of course, the 600 homes did not get built. And by the 1940s, Cleveland Heights was a very different place. What had changed the suburb were three things, none of which city officials or residents could have anticipated. First, of course, the Great Depression of the 1930s. The city of Cleveland Heights survived the Depression by tightening the public belt and cutting city services, street repairs, and salaries. Almost the only significant building projects were done by the New Deal, by the Civil Works Administration, or by the Works Progress Administration. These left lasting improvements to Kane Park and Forest Hill Park. Second, World War II. Prosperity returned with the onset of the war, but the war also consumed public and private energies and monies. And even when there was money, there were few building materials. Home buying and home building suffered. So did the maintenance of public buildings and infrastructure. The third significant change was the entrance into this predominantly Christian and self-styled Anglo-American suburb of a large Jewish population. Wealthy Jewish families had arrived in the 1910s, building and buying homes around the Oakwood Club, as well as in Ambler Heights and the Euclid Golf allotments. During the 1920s, middle-class Jews joined the elite, settling along the Mayfield Road corridor near the Mayfield Cemetery and the Montefiore home, and operating shops and businesses along Coventry. In 1926, B'nai Yeshurun congregation opened its splendid temple on the Heights on Mayfield Road. In fact, it seems very likely to me that the Rockefeller restrictions were a response to this growing Jewish population. In 1937, Jews constituted approximately 29% of Cleveland Heights families and 31% of the school population. Estimates of Jewish population are always just that, because, of course, the Census Bureau cannot record religious affiliation. So these are guesses. Thanks in part to this Jewish influx, the Cleveland Heights population continued to grow, but not nearly as fast as city officials had anticipated. In 1925, for example, Kane had predicted that the city population would reach 100,000. Population actually peaked in 1960 at about 61,000. And Cleveland Heights, like the other older suburbs of Lakewood and East Cleveland, was growing less rapidly than newer suburbs to the east and south. Already densely settled, Cleveland Heights had little vacant land. The days of the big allotments of single-family homes obviously were over. And if the suburbs population was to continue to grow, residential development had to take other forms. In the 1940s then, in this dramatically different context of depleted public resources, diminishing private investment, and growing religious and ethnic diversity, Cleveland Heights officials and residents faced the dilemma of what to do with the great mansions. There were no clear guidelines. Euclid Avenue's Millionaire's Row, the model for Calhoun, had steadily deteriorated. Most of these great mansions had been destroyed and replaced by commerce. This is not what Cleveland Heights officials wanted, but the alternatives were by no means clear. The reuse of the grand mansions had actually begun in the late 1920s. And note here the incursion of Catholic institutions into this very Protestant suburb. In 1927, Ursuline College purchased 2 homes on Overlook. In 1930, Howell Hines sold his Overlook home to the Christian Science Church. That's actually in Cleveland. Then the Depression made the property taxes on the large estates very difficult to pay. The Roland White estate at Fairmont and Lee became the Carmelite Monastery in 1935. The Warren Bicknell home became the Baptist home of Northeast Ohio, now Judson Retirement Center, in 1939. In 1942, the Painter estate became Beaumont School. None of these reuses required action by the Planning and Zoning Commission, and apparently aroused little community concern. The sale and reuse of the Howard Eels estate, however, did arouse community concern. And there it is, a 1917 version. It also clearly illustrates the theme of this presentation: the loss of a symbolic home, controversy generated by fears of religious and ethnic inclusion, resolved by compromise. The estate was built in 1909 on several parcels of land at the intersection of Overlook and Euclid Heights Boulevard. Its architect, Frank Mead, had modeled the home after an English country estate. Mrs. Eels moved out in 1935 and sold the property to the family-owned Stager Corporation. In 1943, a conservative Jewish congregation, the Community Temple, a splinter group actually from Temple on the Heights, requested a special use permit from the Planning and Zoning Commission to lease the huge building. Neighbors on Carlton and Overlook protested. They objected that there was already too much traffic from the Christian Science Church and Ursuline College. The commission turned down the request. Instead, in early 1944, council rezoned the Eels estate for apartments. This rezoning was surely, at least in part, a way of heading off the incursion of a Jewish institution into this elite neighborhood. But the rezoning also had practical advantages. There were already apartments on Overlook to the northeast, where they still are. Moreover, apartments, unlike churches or philanthropic institutions, paid property taxes. No apartments were built, however, and in summer 1948, the Veterans Administration proposed a hospital for the site. Supporters of the hospital pointed out there were few single-family homes in the neighborhood. Nevertheless, the Veterans Administration plan also sparked lively opposition from residents and neighboring institutions, who, as usual, objected to traffic and parking problems. Some of this opposition may have come from the operators of the new Doctors Hospital in a converted apartment building nearby on Cedar Road. Anybody remember Doctors Hospital? Yeah. Opposition may also have come from the owners of another hospital planned but never built at Euclid Heights in Mornington Lane. Frank Kane also opposed the hospital. Appearing before council in a closed session, which the Sun Press ominously referred to as a secret caucus. This appearance apparently turned the tide, for a once divided council now voted against the proposed Veterans Hospital. Today, most of the Eels property is occupied by apartments, buildings, and you recognize that. Hey, give me that cough, thanks. A compromise had been reached. The grand home was gone, but the residential character of the neighborhood was retained, as was the stone wall, which is there to this day. The fate of Patrick Calhoun's home, a grand Italianate mansion on Derbyshire Road, deep within the Euclid Heights allotment, was different, but it demonstrates the same themes. The property owner's desire to sell for a new use and the neighbor's desire to keep the neighborhood the same. The fate of the home also demonstrates, as did the Eels home, the growing diversity of the suburb. The Calhoun home had been purchased by Dr. George Cryle, the founder of the Cleveland Clinic, and when he died in 1943, his widow wished to sell the property. With her blessing, an Orthodox Jewish organization, the American Committee of the Rabbinical College of Telch, asked the Planning and Zoning Commission for a special use permit. The congregation planned to remodel the mansion for its expected 300 students. The mansion would only house 150 as it was. The Rabbinical College lawyer appealed to wartime patriotism in his arguments before the commission, describing the Jewish congregation as having been chased out of Lithuania by Hitler at the point of the sword. The lawyer also pointed out that Beaumont School and the Carmelite Monastery provided precedents for the reuse of a single-family home by a religious organization. Precedents did not impress the neighbors, who were doubtless alarmed, and you gotta be amused by this 50-plus years later. The neighbors who were doubtless alarmed at the thought of sharing their Anglo-American enclave of Berkshire, Kent, Norfolk, and Derbyshire with men wearing long beards and unusual clothes and speaking foreign languages. More than 200 neighbors signed a petition opposing the permit. Mayor Kane also presented letters of protest to the commission. Not surprisingly, the commission rejected the college's plea on the ground that it would be injurious to the financial value of adjacent property. In 1954, the commission again compromised. It approved the plans of the Huff Avenue Baptist Church, now Cedar Hill Baptist Church, to relocate to the site of the Calhoun Cryle Mansion. This was not a residential use, but this was a respectable Protestant congregation. I want to point out also that in 1946, protesting neighbors failed to halt the building of Park Synagogue. I think this is for several reasons. First of all, the park had already operated facilities on the premise, and it was a conservative, not an Orthodox congregation. The neighborhood was also heavily Jewish, and I think that those things made the difference there. Thanks to the post-war housing shortage, some of the great mansions became illegal rooming houses. Rooming houses were permitted in U3 residential areas but required special permits. These rooming houses included the former estate of William Lowe Rice on Overlook Road. The estate had been purchased by Frederick White and is now the site of Waldorf Towers. This became an illegal rooming house, and so did other homes on Overlook and Kenilworth. The city's most famous rooming house was the estate of Dr. Charles Briggs. Designed by Charles Schweinfurth, architect for the very wealthy, this 30-room home had a ballroom and several outbuildings and occupied an entire block bounded by Coventry, Mornington Lane, Overlook, and Edghill. In its glory days, and surely this must be one of them, the estate had been photographed by Margaret Burke White. When Briggs died in 1937, his children wished to redevelop the property to include several homes that would face on a park, but nothing came of these plans. 2 years later, Sergei B. Popolov requested permission to use the estate as a site for his dance studio. Nothing came of this either. The home was then sold to Joseph Schirmer, who rented out its many rooms and outbuildings, and consequently ran afoul of the city's efforts to crack down on what the city called the rooming house racket. In 1953, Cleveland Heights Police verified that the estate was occupied by 19 persons who paid a total of $1,000 a month in rent. The city then moved to shut the rooming house down, but Schirmer fought back, first asking the city to rezone and then challenging the constitutionality of the city ordinance against multifamily use of a single-family home. In 1955, an appeals judge backed the city, but the fate of the property remained in limbo for another decade. A compromise solved the problem. Although neighbors again protested, in 1964, the City Council finally permitted the property to be rezoned for condominiums, which is a new zoning use. Investors, including Charles Briggs' son, John Briggs, bought the property, and despite threatened lawsuits, the original home was demolished and the new condominiums opened in 1965. Another compromise, the pool, ballroom, and portions of the estate walls were preserved. None of these changes had been easy, but compared to the difficulties occasioned by the reuse of the Severance family mansions at Mayfield and Taylor, these earlier battles had been picnics. Members of the Severance family had bought properties here at Mayfield and Taylor in the 1890s. Dr. Benjamin Milliken, husband of Julia Severance, and Dr. Dudley P. Allen, husband of Elizabeth Severance, Julia's cousin, had summer homes here. And this lovely turn-of-the-century photo of Severance's relaxing in their country setting. In the 1910s, these two families moved from Euclid Avenue to permanent homes in Cleveland Heights. Both families replaced their summer farmhouses with mansions in English Revival styles. The Millikens was called Ben Bray, and Mrs. Allen, who had married Francis Fleury Prentice in 1917, named her more formal home Glen Allen. And there's a nice picture of Glen Allen. In 1911, John L. Severance moved to Cleveland Heights across the street from his cousin and sister on the 125-acre parcel that had been purchased by his father, Lewis Henry Severance. After his father died in 1913, John L. Severance inherited this property, which he named Longwood. Architect Milton Dyer designed the, well, I need a slide here. Okay. Architect Milton Dyer designed the first version of the house. Charles Schweinfurth remodeled it. Like his father, John L. Severance had ambitions to develop the area. In 1910, 1911, had begun buying parcels for a subdivision of smaller homes planned for the eastern border of his father's estate. In 1915, Severance purchased the 100-acre minor farm south along Taylor. This property was later developed as Severn, Shannon, and Bendemeer. When John L. Severance died in 1936, he left a half interest in his estate, Longwood, to Severance Milliken, son of Dr. Benjamin and Julia Severance Milliken, and the other half of the estate to the Cleveland Museum of Art. Milliken purchased this half in 1946. In 1937, Milliken initiated plans to develop Longwood as what he called a high-class residential park of 800 to 900 single-family homes on curving boulevards, perhaps in imitation of Rockefeller's Forest Hill. A few of these homes may have been built on Crest and Severn, but the rest of the development never materialized. In 1948, Milliken made a second effort to develop the property, this time as a shopping center. Citizens organized in opposition, led by Severn neighbors, the local Chamber of Commerce, and the Cleveland Heights League of Women Voters. The rezoning was defeated in 1950. And here's a nice aerial of Longwood in 1949. You can barely see the estate in the trees. Less than 3 years later, however, Milliken made another effort to develop his vast property as a shopping center. The time was riper. Other great mansions, the Eels and Rice White properties, were in the process of redevelopment. Across the street from Longwood, Glen Allen had been demolished, and a portion of it had been developed as single-family homes. In addition, shopping malls were being built in suburbs across the country. Nearby suburbs had already attracted shopping centers: Cedar Center, Van Aken Shopping Center, and Eastgate in Mayfield Heights. Clearly, these are the wave of the shopping future. In 1953, then, Milliken threatened to sell Longwood for non-payment of taxes if the council did not permit rezoning for commercial use. Perhaps to sweeten him up, Milliken donated 13 acres of the southeast section of the property for a school which was soon named after him. Cleveland Heights Mayor Henry Pirtle was sympathetic to Milliken's dilemma, and in August 1953, introduced the ordinance to rezone the property for commercial park use. Council had already asked the Regional Planning Commission, however, to make recommendations about the whole Mayfield-Taylor area. In 1954, this commission recommended for mixed commercial residential use and against a regional shopping center on the grounds that it would damage existing business districts such as Cedar Lee and would lower property values. But Pirtle explained to residents that the city needed the property taxes that a shopping center would generate. The alternative, he warned, might be an increase in their own taxes. Disregarding this, neighbors regrouped in opposition as the Cleveland Heights Homeowners Protective League, and they ran these wonderful ads in the Sun Press, such as this one. The $25 million is the projected cost for the original projected cost for the shopping center. And after council hired a zoning expert who gave the rezoning his okay, The Homeowners League responded, "You be the expert, Mr. and Mrs. Cleveland Heights. The Severance estate plans, are they dream or nightmare?" Mayor Pirtle forced the resignation of the head of the Planning Commission when she challenged the rezoning. The League of Women Voters, the Chamber of Commerce, and the Heights Sun Press rejoined the opposition. Opponents and supporters packed emotional public meetings. It's beginning to sound familiar. Council in Milliken hired still another expert, the Urban Land Institute, for still another opinion, this one also favorable. And in December 1954, Council voted unanimously to rezone the property with the provision that all plans for the property get the approval of council and a new board of control. Opponents were not finished, however. The Homeowners Protective League filed an injunction that halted building plans until December 1957, when the Ohio Supreme Court upheld the validity of the rezoning. Milliken moved to Gates Mills in 1960. After further amendments to the rezoning legislation and other delays, Longwood was raised in 1961, as we saw. All that remained of the elegant estate were the stables, deeded to the school district and now used, I think, as storage. There are usually plans to reuse them, and an inoperable marble fountain that sat abandoned for almost 40 years until it was moved to the entrance of Severance Town Center, thanks to Chuck Miller, who's in the back. In 1962, ground was broken for the regional shopping center, which was named Severance Center, to evoke the memory of the site's departed elite residents. When it was completed in summer 1963, Severance Center was reputedly the third largest enclosed mall in the country. Its official opening in September was attended by Cleveland's high society, the men in black ties and tuxedos. The mall was anchored by Cleveland's two most distinguished department stores, Higbee's and Haley Brothers. Oh, breaks your heart, doesn't it? What happened to them? Between the two anchors were dozens of specialty shops for the affluent customers that the mall hoped to attract. Encircled by a 50-acre parking lot, the center was designed not for those who rode the bus or walked, but for those who drove. And here it is in its glory days. Although neighbors had lost their battle against the mall, city officials had again compromised. To diminish the impact of this huge commercial intrusion into a residential landscape, the city mandated parkland that separated the mall and parking lot from Taylor and Mayfield and required stands of trees that screened the nearby homes. It is a lot of parking. The last great battle over the fate of the great mansions was over. And in conclusion, we can see that during these years, residents had good reason to worry about what the world was coming to. The world, or at least Cleveland Heights, had indeed come, if not to an end, certainly to a different place. And if we look again at this photo of Severance Center, we can see some of those differences. First, by 1963, Cleveland Heights had become home to many kinds of people. The religious diversity that appears in this story of the great mansions as Catholic and especially Jewish institutions enter the suburb continued to grow. And that religious diversity appears in this photo, or at least almost appears. You get to stretch a little bit to see it. To the south of Severance Center developed the lively, vital cluster of Jewish institutions, the Hebrew Academy, the Bureau of Jewish Education, Taylor Road Synagogue, among others, around which a large Jewish community had grown up. To the north of Severance Center, on the former site of Glen Allen, stood the Jewish Community Center, which occasioned another furious battle. This Jewish presence would shape the suburb's landscapes its public and private schools, and its politics. And Severance Center itself, despite its initial pretensions to elegance, could not remain exclusive. Just as its opponents had feared, this giant mall attracted all kinds of people. Among them were African Americans. And these shoppers were in the vanguard of the next great wave of immigrants to Cleveland Heights. Second, as the giant parking lot illustrates, Cleveland Heights had become an automobile suburb. The automobile has continued to create both opportunities and headaches for us, and has reshaped our public places and our private lives. Most immediately, however, the triumph of the automobile would sustain the civic activism that first emerged when residents got all riled up about the great mansions. This activism would translate next into opposition to proposed federal highways in the late 1960s and the defeat of the Clark and Lee Freeway in 1970. In the case of the mansions and the proposed highways, civic activism appeared as not in my backyard. But activism would soon take dramatically different forms. It would resurface in the Heights Citizens for Human Rights and the Heights Community Council's fight for open housing and racial equity throughout the 1970s. Activism would appear also in the wealth of grassroots organizations such as Reaching Heights and Coventry Peace. It would appear in the battle over the new community center, and boy did it appear. Activism would appear in the Visioning Committee, in the battle over same-sex health benefits, and in the controversy over the library's new buildings. So in these significant ways, the Cleveland Heights of today, in the year 2002, in its variousness, its cultural richness, and its lively citizenry, begins with these yesterdays, 1943 to 1963. Thank you.
How much of these ideas, this history of ideas that you have used to frame and then illustrate through your lecture here, and probably further illustrate in your book, which I've not read yet, did you have a pretty good idea were there? I mean, did you hypothesize the structure of this thing from these ideas of change, and then do the research to find that you were on the right track and tweaked at the edges, or do you just dig into the research and come out with the ideas at the end?
I think I'm on? Talking this? Okay, sorry. I didn't start with many preconceived ideas. Billy and I grew up next door to one another in Shaker, and I didn't really think much about Cleveland Heights. And by the time I moved here in 1965, the Cleveland Heights passed as home of the social register Blue Book families. That period was kind of gone, and it was not part of my consciousness when I sat down to write. So that was kind of a discovery to me of that, those sort of aspirations, which I think were very definitely there. Much of this was a discovery to me. I lived here many, many years before I started the book. I am, by profession, a historian. I served on Landmark Commission for a dozen years, and all of this was news to me almost. So, no, I didn't begin with preconceived ideas too much. Is that a kind of hedging answer?
Any other questions? Well, thank you very much, Marion.
Okay.
And
Jane has.
Oh yeah, and there are some books at the back if anyone wants to purchase it. I think Marion, we'll find a spot for Marion to sit for those of you who bought books, and she can sign them for you.
Okay.
There are some people here who remember living right near the estate, and I wonder if Kay would like to talk about it.
I grew up on Maple,
Oh, yeah.
and my sister still lived, my dad built a house there in 1922, and my sister still lives there, she's over there. And we had, just going back to some nostalgic things about the Severance estate, it went up Crest and then around on Wood and into Maple and down Severn Road, and there was a picket fence, and there was a hole in the fence. And we used to go through there, and there was a whole park up there, it looked like a metro park. There was forests, but there were all laid out paths and ponds. So we used to go in there and play, and in the winter, we went and ice skated on the ponds. But if we would hear somebody coming, you know, they'd be walking with the dogs. They weren't aware that we were even there when we'd take off. Now, on the eastern side was Oakwood Country Club, about 2 streets over. We could walk down Wood Road, cut through, and go down Oakwood to Center Mayfield. They had a toboggan slide, and we used to go use it, and nobody ever said, you know, don't use it. They had a skating pond, and we used to skate over there. We didn't swim in the pool. And then a friend of ours, Dave Ogilvy, a friend of my mom and dad's from Scotland, he was the pro at Oakwood for many years, and his daughter Isabel won the city championship for Oakwood one year, and I think those are some interesting factors. How much of Oakwood is in Cleveland Heights?
Kara, do you remember how much of Oakwood is in?
I think it's about 2/3.
Well, during World War II, they turned their club over
Right.
to the Army, and it was an MP base. They
Right.
trained MPs. So we had a whole Army thing over there and a USO over at Center Mayfield. So it was a very interesting place to live.
I bet.
When I reflect on that.
Between the mansion and the Oakwood Club, it must have been
I never was
lovely.
into the mansions, but I passed them many times. We cut through over
Right,
there, you know.
right.
Yeah.
And this is one of the ladies who's told us her oral history. And so for those of you, keep your ears out, because this is the kind of thing you'll be hearing about in the next year or two with our project. These are some fantastic stories. Any other memories, questions? Great.
Apparently all of the big houses really just lasted for one generation of the families,
It
right?
seems that way. At least these did anyway, these homes. Only, it seems inconceivable now that you would build a mansion like this and divest yourself of it or reuse it in some way. Yeah. These do anyway. Some of the great homes are, of course, still remain. You know, these, yeah, these are just the ones that whose reuse generated a fuss, and you can trace that very easily by looking at the minutes of the Planning and Zoning Commission. The two were split apart in 1948, but if you go through the minutes and you can see the petitions of Derbyshire Road residents saying, "Not in my neighborhood, no, thank you very much. None of that for us." So that's the place that you pick that up, and the newspaper too. The Sun papers also carry that. Yeah.
What happened to the Glen Ellen estate? The one north on Mayfield?
Glen Ellen is where the JCC is now. And Lutheran High School.
But I mean, was that a contentious selling also?
The Lutheran High School wasn't. The JCC was very contentious. And the contention occurs simultaneously with the rezoning of the Severance property, and I think that probably held up the rezoning of the Glen Allen site as well. They wanted to get one controversy settled before they resolved the other one.
Was JCC the Brayburn estate?
No, I'm
Prentice, that was the Prentice estate. JC.
yeah,
Prentice.
yeah, Prentice. Severance married Prentice. Hughes.
Also.
It's hard to keep the Severances straight, especially when they marry several times.
That's all right in a marriage.
I was wondering when they raised these beautiful homes, if they made any attempt to salvage the woodwork or
Yeah.
the windows? Or
Well,
what happened?
at least I know that Longwood was, people went through and bought stuff. the mantels, the windows. I don't know which I find more shocking, that you would destroy it or that you would sell the family mantle. I guess if it's your family mantle, you have your right to sell it.
I've heard stories of people saying that certain things from different places end up all over Greater Cleveland. One thing that, if you want to look before you leave out this back door, when Longwood was torn down, much of the paneling in one of the rooms was reused as a conference room in the Austin Company building, which was the developer, architect. And as you all know, within the last year, that was torn down. And so the paneling was again salvaged out of that. Most of it ended up at Western Reserve Historical Society, but one of the doors is in this back hallway until I find a better place for it. But it's got some fantastic scroll work just on the one door, and imagine an entire room with the same kind of woodwork. So it was saved twice on the same site.
In Our Day, which you may have seen, In Our Day, has some beautiful pictures of the interior of the Severance home. Peggy?
Just going to ask, I've been curious my whole life if anyone has ever seen the interior of Severance. You may have, or Marion.
Of the Severance home?
Because I grew up 2 blocks, as you know, I live on the same street with you. But I'm just wondered, I know they had a big sale, and I used to play there as a child and catch butterflies in the woods, before they built Severance. But no one's ever,
I know that it was open, but I didn't go to see it, and I'm really mad at myself that I never went and saw it before they destroyed it. Yeah. Alls I remember was the limos going in and out the driveway, the chauffeur-driven cars. But I really never saw anybody close up.
In Our Day is available at the library.
It's Apple Tree. But Jane, don't you have In Our Day? Or
Yes, I usually do.
there you go.
Our local,
The interest everybody has in Cleveland Heights history, I'm always out of everything.
our local Cleveland Heights bookstore. Also, Heights Community Congress does sell copies of that as well. But it's got some wonderful old photographs of both the interior and the exterior in that book. Any others? Well, let's all give Marion a hand.
Thank you.